Last day I talked to my dad on the phone. He killed himself on Sunday. I talked to him Friday and I was laughing with him on the phone. I was like,
this new generation, they see what's happening. Kids aren't getting a second, third, fourth chance. They're dying quick.
we're so afraid of what people think and judgment and all that. And at the end of the day, I went from a life that I fucking hated to a life that I loved every minute of it. I never thought it would be this way, but here it is now. And now I get the ability to enjoy my life.
This week we have an amazing guest. His name's Eric Zink, and he's a fellow brother in recovery. And I think, I'm going to talk to him today, but I think he's also a fellow brother with ADHD. So I'm excited to hear his story and learn a little bit about his perspective on things. As always, thank you so much for listening. Make sure you like, comment, share, get this out there because somebody may need to hear this message today. And with that being said, let's hear from a couple of our sponsors. When addiction takes hold, finding the right help is so crucial. Better Addiction Care collaborates with the best treatment centers across the nation to provide personalized solutions that fit your needs and your insurance. Their team's available around the clock to guide you through the process. Visit their website at betteraddictioncare.com. Help is so much closer than you think. Let's get started. When someone's searching for addiction or mental health treatment, they're likely going through one of the hardest moments of their life. If your facility isn't showing up when they need help, they might end up somewhere else that doesn't truly care. And that's where Brand North comes in. They've helped top treatment centers ethically grow their reach so more people get the right care. So visit brandnorth.com to see how their proven SEO strategies can help your business connect with those who need you most. All right, let's get to it. Thank you so much for being here, dude. Like, I really appreciate you agreeing to do this. Like I said, you come across my page all the time and I've been following you. I actually realized I hadn't been following you, but I really was, because you'd come across my page and I'd watch the videos and I'd give it a heart, but I finally actually hit the follow button, I think a couple days ago or a couple weeks ago. But I have been watching your content for quite some time, and I find all of it just very, not only entertaining, but informative.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the recent things that I'm seeing on the ADHD stuff really stuck out to me. And that's a big reason why I want to talk to you today, because I think you have some incredible insight on that. And I struggle with it. I know that, trying to get you scheduled on this podcast, I was sending you emails and sending you the wrong time, and then sending you the wrong time for a second time and then a third time. And it's my ADHD going off. So I appreciate you being patient with me. I'm curious though, like you speak about it as if you have it. And I'm curious, is it something that you struggle with as well?
Oh, yeah. I was originally diagnosed ADD at 13. And this is 93, 94 that I got diagnosed at. The only reason I even got a diagnosis for it was my dad was a family practitioner. He was a doctor. And my grades in school were just horrible. And my social skills were horrible. And all I wanted to do was be everybody's friend. And I just struggled focusing. And this is right when they started saying, hey, there's something up with how our brains are working. And they came out with ADHD, and he got me into a psychiatrist that he did work with. And it took me like 2 weeks, and I finally ended up with a diagnosis and was diagnosed with ADD. They put me on Ritalin, and overnight, everything changed. I could focus in school. I could take notes. I remembered to turn in assignments. I remembered assignments. I was a good student all of a sudden. Still had some struggles and stuff. Later on, I was re-diagnosed at 17 with ADHD. And then they changed my meds up. I switched from Ritalin over to Adderall because Ritalin just wasn't lasting long enough in my system. I was burning through it too quick. And so it's something that I've lived my entire life with. And so anytime I got off of my medication, I found ways to find my own medication.
Yeah.
Which led me down a very addiction heavy route, which it turned out with all the research they've done now is those play hand in hand together. So I've lived my entire life with it.
I think that I probably didn't have it as severe as other people, but I did get diagnosed with it. And, I've got all kinds of stories that I can tell, but that one sticks out in my mind was 3rd grade. I couldn't pay attention in class, so they actually put me in one of the special classes. I don't know if it was special ed or not. I don't know if I can say that, but it was one of those classes where there's just a few people in it. And I remember being in there and I was just bouncing off the walls, man, like just going nuts and just not paying attention to the teacher. And the teacher, like, she banged her hand on the ground and just really pissed off. And she looked at me and she's like, "Are you on medicine? Because you need to be on medicine." And I calmed down and, like, sat down and, like, thought about that and didn't cry at school or anything, but when I got home, for some reason, I just, like, opened up to my mom and just it all spilt out and just a blob of tears and told my mom about this teacher and what she said to me, and my mom, obviously being Kathy Fisher, the mom who she is, she stormed into the school the next day and had some words with the principal and that teacher. But, things were different. I didn't have to go see that teacher anymore, but that actually sparked, you know, me getting diagnosed. We went and saw a psychiatrist, and they tried to put me on Adderall. Actually, I think it may have been Ritalin at first. They tried to put me on something, and it didn't seem to work for me. It actually put me to sleep. And maybe it's because I wasn't on it long enough. I also think I remember my mom telling me that she tried to take it and she took it and she cleaned the whole house when she took it. And that kind of made her think like, do I really want my son to be on this?
Mhm.
So it didn't last long. I didn't stay on Adderall, but I have a similar story where I never felt normal and I turned to drugs and alcohol to
Mhm.
make me feel. So again, I really relate to you on that and why I wanted to bring on here. One thing you mentioned that I think other people might be confused about this too. Would you be able to explain the difference between ADD and ADHD?
I can, and it depends on who you talk to even now. If you go off the DSM-5 or whatever book that is, it still has ADD and ADHD. If you talk to a lot of the therapists and doctors now, they don't even talk about ADD. It's all ADHD and the different classifications. It always gets really confusing after a while, and it's like they try to smart it way too much, and it gets lost in translation. Essentially, it's the hyperactivity is the only difference between them, which is like with ADD, it doesn't have the impulsivity that ADHD does. ADHD has that impulse, dopamine, high kick, distraction drive, and we'll do some of the dumbest stuff ever because our brain is dopamine searching versus somebody who's ADD who they don't like dopamine search the same way. So there's not that impulsivity. They do have trouble collecting their thoughts and they deal with paralysis and all of that. And they're distracted, but they don't have that impulsivity side. That's the big difference between the two.
Gotcha. I'm interested to learn a little bit more about you, like on a personal level and where you went. Like how dark did it get? Like obviously you're in recovery now.
Mhm.
And, you found out at a young age, I think you said 13 years old, that you have ADHD. And then when you didn't have your medication, you were always searching for something. When did things like spiral out of control or how did that, what was your path to addiction?
Realistically, as a kid in my teenage years, I mean, I started drinking at 14, and you touched on it. I mean, people with ADHD, we have rejection dysphoria, sensory dysphoria, which means we don't feel like we fit in. We have speech issues. Like I was in speech class. We have a lot of different challenges, and so we want to be normal. And alcohol can make us feel normal. It also gets us to fit in. It's we can be loud and we can be ourselves with it because it's now acceptable because you're drinking. It's easier to make friends that way. And it's all stuff
Right.
that we struggle with sober or just with ADHD in general. And so, I mean, I started drinking at like 14 just to fit in. And I experimented with a lot of drugs in high school, again, just to fit in. Nothing really grabbed hold except for drinking in a sense. I tried cocaine in high school. I did a lot of LSD and acid, MDMA, DMT, whippets. I mean, all this. I mean, coke.
Yes.
I mean, all that stuff. There are certain
Yeah.
drugs I didn't do. Like I never wanted to do crystal meth because that was a scary drug to me. Heroin. And this is back, in the 90s. The only way I knew of using heroin is by shooting it up. I had a fear of needles and no desire to do that.
Yeah.
Crack
Yeah.
cocaine was it came from a wealthier family. Like crack cocaine wasn't something that even crossed my mind. I'm not even subjected to that. And so I used it, experimented a lot in high school. And then drinking was always just kind of there. And then when I was in my 20s, I've been married quite a few times. I've been
Mhm.
married 5 times. And there's
Okay.
reasons behind them all, but I got married at a very young age to prove my
Okay.
parents wrong. I got married at I don't know, I was 19 when I met her, or yeah, no, I was 19 when I got married. And then I was 23 when I got divorced. And we had moved to California. I was living in Florida with her. I grew up in Michigan. Always drinking. Drinking was my escape. It made me feel normal. My first ex-wife didn't believe in ADHD and didn't believe in me taking my ADHD meds. I don't need medication. They alter my brain, that type of deal. So I wouldn't take them and I would just drink. Well, I couldn't control my drinking. And so that would always get out of hand. And then when we were going through our divorce, I didn't use cocaine since high school. And I was with a employee of mine and we ended up getting some coke and I ended up doing it and just I'm going through a divorce, super depressed, bad place in life, just not
Mhm.
good mentally. And here I do a drug that made me feel unbelievable. And that time
Yeah.
that's when it hit differently. And now
Yeah.
I wanted to do this drug because it relieved everything. It stopped all that inner dialogue that I have. I mean, people with ADHD, they don't realize that there's a lot of people out there that don't have conversations in their head like we do. And when you have this whole inner dialogue, I mean, you can have a conversation with somebody in your head, with them in your head, and your brain almost takes it in like you had a conversation with them and you never did. And you
Yeah.
don't realize that because your brain doesn't register the difference. And
Yeah.
so it was something I struggled with from a young age of just drinking. And as life progressed, it just got worse, as time started to pass. Um,
Yeah.
and it just slowly gets itself out of control.
What was your rock bottom moment, if you don't mind me asking?
My rock bottom moment, I was 36. I was on my fourth marriage. I hated my wife. I hated my life. I was general manager of Dennis Dillon RV in Westminster, California. I was making like 50 grand a month and
Wow.
all the money in the world, but I hated my life. I
Mhm.
hated. I didn't want to wake up. There's a reason I don't own a gun because if I would have owned a gun, I would have blown my brains over all over the walls. I would have had no problem doing that. And finally, I got fired, and I was laying in bed, and I just started sobbing. And it was like my life always did that. I would destroy everything, and then I would rebuild it all better, and then I would like self-sabotage and destroy it again. It was just a cycle that I've had for years. And it was like, fuck, man, how do I stop this? And
Right.
and the only thing I could think of is the only thing that I never changed was I always drank and I always did cocaine. And I was like, man, maybe if I stop this for a little while, I can get it all back together. And so I decided I'd get sober. And then the next morning I woke up and still decided I'd get sober, but this time I changed it and said I'll get sober for 6 months. I'll put my life back together and then I'll just relapse. It's easier to do that way. In 6 months, I should be able to rebuild it pretty easy, quick, all that. I'll play the victim of it, the poor me. Didn't really realize what my addiction was driven by. Um, and that was my initial plan. And then 3 weeks into my sobriety, my dad killed himself,
Mm.
um, which was almost 2 years after my wife had killed herself. It was a different, not the wife I was married to, but and so and he was my rock through her suicide. And her suicide, I went off the fucking rails. That's when I got to the point I was drinking 3/5 of vodka a day, puking up vodka through work, puking up blood,
Oh my
snorting rails
God.
of coke at work, just I would snort through an 8 ball a day, easy, blowing out my nose, just anything I could do to like numb it. And so then when my dad took his life, I was like, he never really saw me sober. And I was like, fuck this. And I kind of like grabbed onto everything I had before he killed himself. And one of them was this sobriety. So I kind of latched on and kind of made it my identity. And I started just really working like, okay, how do I really kind of do this? And
Wow.
that's what kind of made the sobriety stick. And why I'm like a real believer in like there's no right or wrong way to get sober. I think a lot of us get sober because we never planned on it.
Yeah. Let's take a step back for a minute. I want to make sure I heard that correctly. So, when your father killed himself,
Uh-huh.
that's actually what triggered you to continue in sobriety.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's so interesting to me. The last guest I had on, actually one of my best friends, Jeffrey, his father passing away from pancreatic cancer when he was a teenager is actually what caused him to spiral. So this is very interesting. It's like a complete opposite. That traumatic moment actually triggered something in you to where it was like, okay, I'm going to change my life. Tell me a little bit more about that. Like what?
It did, but it didn't. And it changed my life in a really bad way, actually. And so what happened is, so through my 20s and stuff, constant alcohol and drugs were always there. Cocaine was always there. And I met my third wife. Her name was Brandy, and I met her in Arizona. I ran different dealerships for this RV dealership. That's what I always did. I was always in sales. RVs was this hidden gem that you made ridiculous money on, and I was really good at being a functioning addict. I was really good at my job and making money for dealers. And I met her. We were both codependent addicts. She was an alcoholic. I was an alcoholic. She liked benzos. I liked cocaine. She liked cocaine too. And she ended up getting Wernicke's, which is when you drink too much, your brain depletes the thiamine in it. So you have
Mm.
blind spots on your brain. So your brain starts shutting down. It's kind of like you have dementia, Alzheimer's and stuff. It's really
Is
weird.
that the same as like, is that wet brain? Is that what they call that?
Yeah.
Or is that
It's
different?
well similar to wet brain. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so
Wow.
she was hospitalized for that. And finally got to the point I was like, dude, if we are together, like we're both going to die. We
Yeah.
are going to die. And so we ended up separating. And I never filed for divorce. We legally were separated. I filed for divorce. We never went further with it than just the filing. I took her to Arizona because I knew if we were together, we would die essentially. I mean, she could ask me, I could be like, hey, you can't drink anymore. I can't drink anymore. Then she'd ask me that night, hey, bring home, 50 Jägermeister and a 24 pack. And I would stop at the store and bring home a 50
Yeah.
Jägermeister 24 pack.
Yeah.
And so when we were separated, we were separated for almost a year, and she ended up killing herself August 27th, 2015. So it was about almost 10 days after my birthday, she killed herself. And that fucked me
Mm.
up. Like it fucked me up.
Yeah. I
And
imagine.
so I spiraled right out of control with that. That's when I went off the rails. That's drinking immediately went to 2 fifths a day. And I was drinking so much, I started blacking out a lot. So I
Yeah.
started really relying on cocaine to try and offset it. And
Yeah.
then, I mean, it just numbed everything. It numbed all that trauma, all that stuff. And it was very, I already had abandonment trauma. I didn't really realize. And so it just added to that. And I was really good at manipulating people and playing the victim. And now I was the ultimate victim. My wife killed herself. So I had the excuse that no one questioned it or cared.
Yeah.
And I just went off the rails. And then when my dad, he was kind of like rock through it and stuff, even.
Yeah.
It helped me out a decent amount. I mean, he killed himself 4 days before my birthday in August. And it was one of those things like I just kind of latched onto what I had before he killed himself because I was really close to my dad. And I was like, I had my sobriety and he was like, you never saw me sober. And I was like, and maybe there's something to it. Maybe this will help me because I knew how bad I had gotten. And I was still on that fresh brain of like, I got to put my life back together. Like my life's already right now still destroyed. And
Yeah.
I'm on this hardcore and I'm like, fuck it, dude. Like I'm kind of in on the sobriety thing and it still allowed me to kind of play the victim, but I won't use. And Man, I will say this, I was sober for 5 years and I fucking hated it. 3 years into it, tremendously hated it. Like, I was that dude at AA meetings and stuff where, Matt would stand up and be like, "Hey, I'm 90 days sober. My life's so great." I'm like, "Fuck you, dude. I'm 2 years sober and I fucking hate it, dude." I mean, I hated my life. I hated everything just sober. That was the only difference.
Yeah.
I was sober and I hated it. It wasn't until I realized that it wasn't my addiction as much that I hated and all that, but started realizing what were triggers of my addiction or why was I numbing? And that's where I really had to like look at my wife at the time and be like, I hate you. And that's okay. There's nothing, she's a beautiful woman. We just weren't, we were not a team. We were not meant to be together. And
Mm.
so it was like when divorced her, man, it did get better. I moved. I hated California. I lived in California at the time. I took a job offer in Boise, Idaho. That helped a lot all of a sudden because I hated it was like God, I could breathe all of a sudden. I didn't have this constant pressure of the cost of living and stuff of California. And so there was
Yeah.
things I started doing that started really helping, but I still had a lot of self-sabotaging and stuff that was going on and a lot of struggles and stuff. And I just didn't know why. And then finally I was 5 years sober and I had a meeting and I was sobbing at the meeting, getting my 5 year chip. And I was like, dude, I keep doing all the habits that I was doing when I was using, but I'm not using, and I'm 5 years sober, and, like, I'm collapsing my life again. I asked for a sponsor again, and I started talking to him, and he asked me what was going on. It happened to be in August too when this was all going on, because I got sober 7/25/17. August was coming right on up, and, I was like, "Well, my wife and my dad committed suicide and all this," and he's like, "You ever go to therapy for any of this?" And I was like, "No, you don't. I don't need that. It's overrated." But he was like, "Yeah, you probably should find a trauma therapist." And I was like, "You know what? I probably should. So fuck it, I will." And that's where my work really began. And ended up finding myself an amazing trauma therapist. Was able to really address a lot of my childhood trauma, see the patterns, see why I self sabotaged the way I did, why I manipulated and victimized myself the way I did, why I needed to be seen and heard, um, which was a lot that played into addiction. And man, once I really healed a lot of my trauma, all the urges to use and to drink and all that stuff went away and really got my brain really right. Uh,
Yeah.
and so then all of a sudden I was really able to turn my life around 1,000% very quickly, very easily, and just kind of create whatever I wanted at any time I wanted. It was really amazing.
There's so much to unpack and all of that. Thank you for going through that.
Mhm.
We could probably talk for hours about each moment in that. And your dad, man, I'm really sorry that that happened. Were there signs beforehand? Like, was he a depressed guy or was it,
Oh,
because you
yes.
said that he rock, like you just lost your wife to suicide. He was your rock through this. He was helping you through this. And then he did it.
Mhm.
Like,
He had taken suicide when I was really young. I think I was like 4 or 5, roughly. He attempted suicide. And we were very open as a family about depression and all that. I mean, he got me with a psychiatrist for ADHD and all of that. And this time through, there weren't really any signs. He was getting to the point of retiring, and I knew he was really struggling with that. I was freshly sober for 3 weeks, and I was literally calling him every single day. The last day I talked to my dad on the phone, he killed himself on Sunday, August 13th, 2017. I talked to him Friday and I was laughing with him on the phone. I was like, "Hey, I won't call you at all this weekend so you can get a break from me." Because I was calling, we were talking every day for like hours every day. And there was no hinting or anything like he was doing bad. But I think also at a certain point too, even with like my wife who killed herself, you don't the signs are 50 or 2020 hindsight wise. At the time, you're not picking up on the little things. And they're so bought into that they're so broken and damaged that they don't you overlook it all, if that makes sense.
yeah, for sure. Again, I'm sorry you went through that. And there's another part of your story where you were talking about heartbreak that I related to. That's what started my path. My spiral down was a heartbreak before I met my wife. And then I met my wife, and she's a godsend because I also relate to your story kind of in an opposite fashion of if I didn't have my wife, I'd probably be dead. And the fact that the woman you were with, you guys were both alcoholics, doing snorting coke and just banging it out, you know what I mean? And you guys were heading towards death one way or another. And I believe if I was with somebody like that, that's probably where I would be. So I give my wife a lot of credit for having some tough love with me when I needed it. And she's never drank, I mean, she's drank a little bit, but it gives her a headache. She doesn't like it.
Mhm.
So, not having that temptation in the house, like having her have booze in the house is, just a godsend. And it's just a kind of a stark contrast of what you experienced there. I'm curious to circle it back around to ADHD a little bit, because a lot of the conflicts that I have with my wife, the arguments we get in, I'm starting to realize that a lot of it probably stems back to my attention deficit disorder.
Mhm.
And I say that because of one of your recent videos where you kind of described what ADHD actually looks like, where people may not know that that's what's happening, right?
Mhm.
Like when you're spaced out. It was a really great video. I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about those things if you don't mind, and give people kind of an example of like what is AD what how are people like confusing ADHD? Like they think it's something else. Because I say that because my wife, I feel like when she kind of abruptly comes into a room and I'm hyper focused on something,
Mhm.
she comes into a room and asks me something, and it's just like I get really irritated because I was super hyper focused on it, and she doesn't understand how much that just like throws me for a loop when that happens. So I'd love to get your take on that.
I think with a lot of people, it's getting actually diagnosed with ADHD. I think a lot of people self-diagnose, which is
Mhm.
really bad because it can also mirror BP, or it can mirror bipolar too, and it can also mirror PTSD. And then you also get a lot of people with ADHD. That was part of my problem, is especially because I got diagnosed with other stuff too. I used to kind of define myself by that, and you had to be nice to me because I had these diagnoses. And eventually I had to realize that those don't define me like I define me, and I don't have the right to be a victim to them. And so a lot of it's really learning how things work. And one of the big things is like anger and stuff people don't realize, especially with ADHD. I have to go take a walk. If I start to get pissed off, I have to take a walk. I will not pipe back up. We will not fight. And we don't fight conventionally like that because I will amp myself up. Anger and temper will help your brain create some dopamine. So now you get hyper fixated on why you're pissed off. Now you're mad
Right.
about everything, and everything can piss you off even more. And your temper can get so out of control that it can
Yeah.
really damage your relationship. But there's so many things when it comes down to, somebody chomping wrong or slurping can
Dude.
sit there and piss you off because it's a sensory issues.
When somebody blows their nose next to me, man, it sends me to another planet.
Oh, yeah, and it's one of those that you have to kind of realize, like, "Oh, this is something that's gonna piss me off." Not that I can help that they're gonna blow their nose or not, but, "Okay, let me go into the other room or something. Oh, hey, I'll be right back," and kinda walk away while they do it, so it just doesn't I'm doing something else and distracting my brain, so I'm not sitting there like, "Hey, I wanna stab you in the neck."
Yeah.
Um, and,
You th
it's hard too because it takes a lot of practice in the sense of somebody interrupts you and you're hyper focused. Now you're pissed off, you're angry, but now you're also not going to do what you were doing because now you're over it.
Right,
Because you interrupted
right.
me, fuck this, and now it can
Mhm.
ruin your whole day. And it's like this person didn't even mean to ruin it, and we allowed them to ruin our whole day when they didn't even mean to. So how do I work
Mm.
around this? And that's where, like, even in a lot of cases, if I'm really working on something, I'll shut the door. And if the door's shut,
Yeah,
I'm in here working.
yeah.
And when it's open, I'm not working. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
I got a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I shut that door, but I tell you what, they don't care.
nope.
They just come barging in, man. I
Mhm.
I get it. I get it. I'm curious, man, like, do you think you're very knowledgeable of it now. I wonder what your knowledge of this was, back when you were going through this and during your first few marriages.
Mhm.
Do you think ADHD, obviously, like, addiction issues probably played a part in why
Oh, yeah.
those marriages didn't work. But do you think the ADHD and maybe not having the clarity that you have now of what's going on in your mind, do you think that played a big role into why your marriages didn't work out?
Oh, yeah. You gaslight people essentially and fall in love with people and fall in love with the honeymoon phase. And then the honeymoon phase isn't there. Then you're bored and you're bored with this and you move on to the next thing. And if it's not stimulating, it's not working for you. You know, you start reminiscing of how this relationship in the very beginning was so much fun and now it sucks. And then you're seeking attention elsewhere because you need that outside stimulation because you're not receiving it at home. So you just self-destruct your and self-sabotage your relationship. And then instead of working on yourself, you just treetop it into another relationship after relationship, and you don't even take time to work on yourself or figure yourself out. It's
Yeah.
amazing how it will damage you in so many ways.
Right. It's damaging in so many ways, but another curious thing is like, do you think that it could be a superpower in some instances, or are there certain aspects of ADHD that you could maybe consider helpful or a positive thing?
In general, I think it's a positive thing. All in all, I think ADHD is more of a blessing than it is a curse. Because
Yeah.
your problem solving skills are unreal. Even if stuff has pissed us off, we forget about it the next day. It's object permanent. Something can totally piss us off, or we have completely forgotten about it by the next day, and it doesn't even upset us anymore. You know, you don't miss people. I mean, there's pros and cons to that, you know, but grief doesn't affect us the same way. Sadness doesn't affect us the same way. When it comes to just how resilient you are in life, the risk that you'll take to try something, I think it offers a very fulfilling life as long as you know what you're dealing with. If you know
Yeah.
both sides of it, I think you can utilize the good side so much more.
Yeah. Had a conversation with a young man. His name's Benjamin Lerner on one of these episodes, and he's on the spectrum with autism. And we talked a lot about that, about how, a lot of people will say that too, that, it can be a superpower, but he spoke just about how you need to be able to utilize the good parts to kind of compensate for the bad parts. And I
Mhm.
believe it's very similar for ADHD. I know what my character defects are, my flaws, and what I struggle with, and I have to use the good parts of me to compensate for those.
Mhm.
So that's interesting, man. Very interesting.
But I think you do use them to eventually compensate. And you also, I mean, it's just owning it and just, telling people this is kind of how I am. And it's not like I do this on purpose and how we are. And it's a learning curve. And
Yeah.
if you're with the right people, they have no problem. They understand it. I mean, I was 40 years old and I got diagnosed with, and it took like, I don't know, well over a month. But I ended up getting diagnosed on the level one autism. It's that I was like, oh, cool. What is
Okay.
that? And they said, explained it. You're pretty much Asperger. That's why, I love to study. I can tell you all sorts of things about different things. I can stem in different ways and sensory and all this and repeating cycles of my vocabulary and how I word things and how I repeat myself. And it was all because of the autism side of it. And my dad had Asperger's, and he was diagnosed with Asperger's. And this was back in the '80s when they still said it was Asperger's before they changed it all up because like level one autism, I just hate the sound of that. It's easier for me to comprehend Asperger's. It doesn't. I
Yeah.
don't. But all of it's learning it, explaining it to other people how you are. And the worst part is a lot of times we just feel I think the biggest factor that hurts everybody is when you just feel that like the world owes you something. As soon as you
Mm.
get a diagnosis and you're like, well, the world owes this to me now. Well, the world doesn't owe you shit. You owe it to yourself and the ones that you care about to understand what you have and how to work with that through life.
Yeah.
Instead of, everyone needs to bend themselves to me and how I am, which I don't agree with that whatsoever.
How did you handle that diagnosis? I asked that because a couple of years ago, and I haven't actually publicly said this at all, but a couple of years ago, I got diagnosed with diabetes, and I actually have it's considered type 1.5
Mhm.
diabetes. So my body's still making insulin, but it's not going to continue making insulin forever. It's going to stop, and I have to take insulin to basically make up for the lack of insulin that I'm making. So eventually I'll be on the pump. But when that happened, like I went into a very dark time. And it didn't
Mhm.
seem like it because I'm here on social media. I'm still sober, not drinking or anything, and I'm putting out all these videos about positivity and this or that. But for some reason, getting that diagnosis just really messed me up, man, mentally, and just thinking like, oh my God, I'm gonna get my feet chopped off. Like, my kids are gonna grow up and I'm, without a dad, or I'm not gonna be able to walk my kid down the aisle type thing, and just went to the extreme of
Mhm.
how it was. And I'm curious, I'd love to know how that affected you. How old were you? I think you mentioned that
I was
when you were
40.
diagnosed. 40. So
Mhm.
recently,
Yeah.
somewhat recently. How did that affect you? And you were obviously, I think, were you sober at that time?
Yeah, I got sober at 30. I was 3 weeks before roughly my birthday. I got sober 7/25/17. My birthday is August 17th. So I was technically
Gotcha.
36 when I got sober. But when I got diagnosed with autism, it was eye-opening and it made sense. Like, it was like
Mm,
that piece that was missing in my life that didn't make any fucking sense. Like, why do I talk like, I don't have kids of my own. I decided at a really young age I didn't want my own kids because I would have fucked them up, and I know that. I was an addict. I was at least self-observant enough to know, like, I don't have the right to screw up a kid. And so, I didn't handle other parents and stuff like the normal way, and I'd be very blunt around kids. I have 2 stepkids, and I love them to death, but I'm also very blunt with them too. Like, there's no filter. I'll tell
yeah.
you what's on my mind, and I just didn't understand why I couldn't read the room per se the best. When I was drunk, it helped, and I could read the room really easily drunk, but man, when I'm not, it was very, I'd say, the most inappropriate jokes at the wrong time, all this stuff. And it kind of all made sense because it's a lot different, I think, getting diagnosed with that versus something like, you know, even I could use this as an example. If I got diagnosed with prostate cancer right now, I'm not, but if I did, I'm pretty sure that would fuck me up for a while because I know I need to have surgery. I'm going to have it removed. I know what it does to my libido. I know what like, fuck, man. Like, I have to live my life like this now. Like that. I know a lot of people that relapse and just they turn to drugs when they get diagnoses like that because it sends you into a dark place of worst case scenarios with your brain. And just, it's almost like there's a part of us in a sense, almost that's like, well, what the fuck is the rest of this worth? What's the point of it? And, that's a hard place and a scary place to be sometimes.
What do you say to somebody who's maybe dealing with something like that? Maybe somebody's dealing with, a loved one who committed suicide, or maybe they're dealing with some sort of diagnosis, cancer, or whatever it is. What do you say to somebody that goes through that? Because obviously you've gone through a lot, dude. Like you've
Mhm.
gone through a lot. And now you wear a hat that says warrior on it and you do inspirational videos that reach thousands of people every day. So what do you say to somebody?
Just talk about it. That's the
Get
biggest
it off
one. I
your chest.
mean, you have to talk, and your depression lies to you. Your brain lies to you. Your brain tells you that nobody cares. Your brain isolates you. Depression isolates you. That talking about it and that positive reinforcement eventually can override your brain. When it's
Yeah.
proven that people will sit with you in a dark place and your brain's telling you that nobody will, it shows that there's a difference. We're so afraid of being judged and we're so afraid of being alone in a sense that we will create and make ourselves alone because we're
Yeah.
almost afraid that that's the outcome. A year and a month after I got sober, it was August. I was sober for a year and 1 month, and I tried to kill myself. I did my best
Yeah.
damn attempt to. The only thing that saved me was frozen vodka, and vodka is not supposed to freeze. So my ex-wife had poured it out and filled it with water, and that was enough to snap me out of it because I got pissed at her. At that point, I wasn't talking to anybody about it. I truly felt that I was a burden. I romanticized how much better my family's life was gonna be without me. They didn't have to worry about me. I wasn't gonna be a burden down the road, that, they get to have the life that they deserve now because I'm holding everybody back. It's amazing where you go thought-wise, and you're
Yeah.
not sharing this. So nobody's telling you any differently, and your brain starts to just convince you that this is the best solution. And that's why I think talking about it is so important. And that it's hard to talk to a family member. We're so afraid they're going to judge us or tell us how to fix ourselves or whatever it is, that Sometimes if you're truly struggling, if you tell 10 strangers on a bus that you're going to kill yourself, I guarantee you 8 of those people are going to help you. But you also have to want the help, and you have to be prepared for the help because it's probably going to involve the cops. It's probably going to involve ambulances. It's going to involve everything. That, oh my God, I don't want this added attention, whatever the fuck it might be. But if you really want help and you tell 10 people that you don't know that you're going to go kill yourself, guarantee you're going to get the help that you wanted.
That's true. Very important thing you just talked about there. Talk about it,
Hmm.
right? Get it off your chest. And that's
Hmm.
been my experience too. The rooms of AA saved my life, really. Gave me some hope.
Hmm.
And there's all kinds of like great quotes, and none of them are coming to me right now, but something along the lines of, we recover out loud so others don't have to die in silence. Because there's this weird thing in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that it's anonymous. That's the big thing. They like to, the old timers are very much like what happens in the room stays in the room. We don't talk about it out in the public. But this new generation, they see what's happening with fentanyl and the heroin being laced with fentanyl and carfentanil and all this. And kids aren't getting a second, third, fourth chance. They're dying quick. And that's why people like you and people like me exist, to speak up about it. And not to say that everybody has to speak their mind about it and be loud about it, but I feel like it's an important thing for some of us to do.
Yeah.
And, what you're saying is, you don't need to talk about it and get in front of a camera and make videos and put yourself out there, but find a community, find
Hmm.
people that you trust and that are going to be compassionate, and maybe they're going to show you some tough love too, but you just have to find that courage and be brave to get open about what's going on. I've had those thoughts, man. I've been there in those dark places thinking my family would be better off without me.
Hmm.
Especially like if you have an argument about something stupid with your wife or with your daughter or whatever, and they may say something that they don't mean because they're angry, and then it just starts spiraling inside your head, and you're just like, what is this even, what are we doing here?
Right.
What's the point? But I'd love to circle it back around to just the hope and the fact that you have warrior on your hat, and you've gone through so much and you're helping so many people. And I know that you probably know that. And I know that I've helped a lot of people with my content and my videos, but sometimes we lose sight of that because it's just, it's Facebook and you see just thumbs up and hearts on your screen, but there's people on the other side of that. And you're helping so many people after all that you've been through, man. And I
Hmm.
just think that's so amazing. If there is somebody out there listening to this and they're having those thoughts, like, you can be on the other side of this. There's light on the other side of this darkness that you're feeling right now. So really appreciate you, man. Like, I have a bunch of other questions. Like, I really want to kind of nail home the topic of ADHD,
Hmm.
if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Let me grab one here and we'll riff on it. Here's a good one. So, how do you balance ADHD's novelty with the consistency that recovery requires?
I guess recovery is different for everybody. I had a lot of challenges with AA and NA. I've used them. I've sponsored people before. I know that it is not the only way to get sober. I believe a lot more into therapy than I do essentially both of those programs. And the main reason is the programs are great for community and for connection, which we need, but it's not great for therapy and
Yeah.
why we're using. I found out a lot of what I used for was to numb trauma. Instead of healing any of my trauma, I could control this substance. This substance would make it disappear. And that's why I would use my relapses were all based around traumatic stuff happening or stuff happening where I just needed to silence it. And dropping to my knees, unfortunately for me, and it did make this is just my experience, it did not get me sober, did not keep me sober. What kept me sober though was talking to somebody, being able to vent, being able to work through things that were pissing me off. That was a thing that would get me to relapse. And I also ran into a struggle where I am very for medication can be abused, but medication can also be a tool. And so I would run into the case. I still run into it, and I just kind of laugh and I educate people on it. And Those who want to learn can learn, and those that don't. But especially like with NA, and even I would run into it with some AA, they would find out, I'm on Adderall. Take 10 milligrams in the morning. I take 10 milligrams in the afternoon. It's one of the lowest doses of Adderall you can take. I know people that take 60 milligrams in a day, and I just don't understand how they do that. I'd be high as a kite. And with this, I am able to function. I don't lose my personality. I'm not a zombie, any of that. And I'm productive through the day. And it also allows me to where I don't need to silence my brain as much and I don't need to slow it down. It makes me feel normal. And so then all of a sudden I'd be dealing with them telling me how I'm not sober. And I was like, okay, well, you're not sober. You're on the stimulant and it's altering your brain. Okay, well, half the people in AA and in NA are on an SSRI, which is a serotonin reinhibitor. Well, that's also your
Yeah.
brain. So technically, if you're on an antidepressant, you're not sober. So now all of a sudden we're getting into this battle of who's smarter, how with information from the 60s and 70s, which we've advanced a lot since then with our
Yeah.
knowledge and what we've learned. And
Yeah.
so there are things that, are harm reduction. I mean, I know people that, Cali sober or whatever you want to call it, or people that, great, yeah, I know people that are addicted to weed. I know people that use it because they have bad PTSD, EMDR therapy didn't help them. And they would rather hit the cartridge a couple times and then go to sleep than take Lunesta or any of these massive sedatives. And they also don't want to use opiates anymore. I'm like, all
Right.
right, cool, dude. Like, whatever works for you. I think the part of it's being very open minded. For me, it was realizing, like, hey, I can be sober and live my life, and people are going to try and tell me how to live my life, whatever. I'll laugh at them.
Always.
But if this is
Yeah.
what works for me, it works for me. I'm happy. And that's all that matters is like at the end of the day, like I haven't destroyed my life. I'm not obsessed with anything like I once was. I'm not lying, manipulating, cheating, obsessing, any of this stuff. And I just kind of look at my wife and I'm like, cool, like, what are we doing tomorrow? I think a lot of it even comes down to when the ADHD side of, there's a lot of different medications out there. There are non-stimulant meds that can help. Do the gene swap test, find out what med's going to help you the best, and start your trial and error process and vocalize with a therapist of how you feel. I think a lot of people unfortunately go to family practitioners or general physicians who can prescribe meds because they're an MD. Going to a family doctor isn't somebody who specialized in ADHD or who knows truly about ADHD. And next thing you know, they're throwing 60 milligrams of Vyvanse at you. You don't like how it feels. And they're like, well, I don't know what else to do. And that's the extent that you go instead of finding a psychiatrist who specializes in ADHD going, hey, okay, this is how you're supposed to feel. This isn't how you're feeling. Let's flip you to this med and see how this does, and actually working with you to find the right combination. The
Yeah.
same thing that happens when it goes to doctors and addiction. No doctors out there are taught about addiction. At the best case scenario, they went to some NA meetings or AA meetings. That's like the extent of their education on addiction. So they hear somebody's on Suboxone, and regardless if their arm is broken in a compound fracture, they're actually there not because of the fracture. They're there because they're shopping for pills because they're on Suboxone. Even though somebody who admits openly they're on Suboxone is caring so much about their sobriety that they're making sure you don't give them an opiate because
Exactly.
they're on Suboxone, and my sobriety is what I'm fighting for. And people
Yeah.
don't realize that. And that's the other part I think that hurts a lot too, is that the medical professionals, unless you go to a really good rehab and those doctors actually know about addiction, there's a good group of doctors out there that do realize that, okay, there's a difference between self-medicating and finding medication that actually works.
Right.
And that's why I think it's so important to find the right doctors. And it takes time. It's not, you might go to a doctor and they might suck, and that's okay. You're getting closer to finding one that's not going to suck as bad.
Right.
But
Every wrong one leads you closer.
yeah, it really does. And so, I mean, that's always kind of just been my take on when it came to finding the right doctors, knowing that it's trial and error to find one that I vibe with.
We just moved down to South Carolina, and I won't name any names or anything just in case he watches this for whatever reason, but we just moved down here, had a great doctor back in Cincinnati where we lived, but I, I've never had a a terrible experience with the doctor, but this was just terrible. And I walked in there, and I'll also tell on myself too publicly, I have an addiction to Afrin, to nasal spray. I
Mhm.
can't breathe without it. Right. And that's a very common thing. So many people have that issue. I
Mhm.
know they do. They sell it in every freaking gas station. But I walked in there, I sat down with this doctor for the first time, and like he asked me what kind of medications I was on. I told him, and at the end I was like, "Oh yeah, and I take Afrin." Actually, no, it was already on the computer because I had told my doctor before. And he's like, "You still take Afrin?" I'm like, "Every day, multiple times a day." And he's like, "What?" And it blew his mind that I was addicted to Afrin. He had never heard that. And he got on Google. He was sitting there Googling about Afrin addiction with me sitting right there. And I'm just like looking at this dude. I'm like, I am in the wrong place right now.
Mhm.
So it's absolutely true. And then a couple months later, I finally got into my first appointment with my diabetes doctor, endocrinologist. And she's the most amazing doctor I've ever had in my life. So you're exactly right. Just like keep trying things. And that, that also ties into the whole thing of do what works for you.
Mhm.
Who gives a shit what anybody else thinks if it's working for you? If taking Adderall twice a day is what makes you feel normal and gets you to the next day sober, I consider that sober. If taking Suboxone every day is what keeps you sober, I consider that sober. And even if we don't consider it sober, who cares what we call it? Like, is your life better?
Mhm.
Is your life better? Like, are you not on the verge of dying? You know what I mean?
Oh,
And
yeah.
that there's so many misconceptions about that and about harm reduction, and people are so uneducated about it. And it really just comes down to like mind your own fucking business. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Let people heal the way that they need to heal.
Mhm. And
That's where I'm
everybody almost at a certain point, whether they're an addict or not, starts to think that they're an expert in it, and they're gonna just tell everybody how to do it. And it's like, yeah, it's not really how it is, man. Everybody's story is different. Everybody got
Yeah,
sober differently. There's no one way to get sober.
right. Yeah. Multiple paths to recovery, as they say.
Mhm.
My path was different than yours,
Mhm.
much different. And I've met a lot of people that have some really gnarly bottoms, and thank God, I didn't. I had a rough one, but not compared to some people and the stuff that you've been through, man. I think that's a good segue into like how we can close this meeting out is just how the heck did you become who you are today? Like the dude that gets in front of the camera and gives hope to other people and inspires other people.
I turned it into a business. I started it just because I needed a sounding board. I got bored when I got sober. I started a YouTube channel in 2018, and then I took to Twitter because I didn't know anyone on Twitter, because I was still really afraid of, like, people that I worked with, employees, all that stuff. I was still managing RV dealerships, and I just kinda enjoyed it. And then I grew on TikTok. I had one account, got over 1,000,000 followers, almost 2,000,000, like 1.9. And man, I thought I was Jesus Christ, the saint of the fucking world, man. I thought I knew it all. And it just fed my ego. And that's all it did. And it was so unhealthy. It was so toxic. I created a Discord that was an insane asylum ran by the inmates with no proper anything. And I mean, there's 80,000 people in this fucking Discord.
Wow.
I was gonna change the world, how I look at mental health. So fucking sick. Finally went through a cancel culture even. I deleted all my social media, blew it all up, had no desire to do it again. Only thing I never got rid of was my YouTube channel. That was always my pride and joy. And I met my wife now, and she was like, "Man, you should do it. It does help people." And I was like, "All right." So I kind of jumped back on it. Man, I didn't like my old channel. It was very toxic. So finally, I just got it actually deleted from TikTok. And I started over, and I was like, "You know what? I'm just gonna do this. But if I do it, I'm doing it for either me or for money, because money keeps you honest. You looking at things as business decisions, it's either good for business or bad for business. So you're going to look at things a little different. When it's ego driven, it's very addiction driven of what's going to feed my ego." And I just started slowly doing it, and everything kind of blew right back up because I don't mind being honest and vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just turned it into a business, and it's what I do for a living now. I travel all over the US to different universities, do a lot like with Arkansas has a really good peer recovery. They fly me out there a lot to do speaking programs. I keynote at a
Okay.
lot of things, have a lot of brand deals, all that stuff. Grew millions of followers back, and it's black and white and it's business.
Yeah.
And it keeps it healthy for me, and I have healthy boundaries, and I'm not here to save the world. I'm here to share my experiences, and that's it. And my family comes first.
I really like that, dude. I know that people are gonna listen to this, and half of the population that listens to this is gonna hear that, and it's gonna cause some anger. It's gonna piss them off so bad. But what I hear in it, like, I hear you, right? And it's not like, "Oh, I'm just in it for money." No, it's like you're in it for a livelihood. Doesn't mean
Mhm,
you don't wanna help people, and what you're saying isn't the truth,
mhm,
right? But, I mean, is it so wrong for you to want to have a business? And it's like, okay, I can have a business helping people, doing what I like to do at the same time, and doing that unapologetically. It's the people that try to hide it that it's a problem. They're trying to hide the fact that they're making all this money and this or that. And, recently I've made a shift where, I've been really afraid for a long time. I didn't monetize any of my pages at all
mhm,
because I was afraid of the pushback that I would get. But it's like, I've worked really hard at what I do.
mhm,
And if I was doing that with anything else that wasn't, in front of people, then it wouldn't be a problem. So
mhm,
why is it a problem that I should be, financially not necessarily rewarded, but supported by
mhm,
what I do and what I give back? So I appreciate your answer on that. I think people are going to absolutely 100% hear it wrong at first, but I challenge people.
I do a lot of live streams. I do a lot where I will get on. I'll go live usually 5 days a week, and I will share with you how to get sober. I'll share with you how I got off nicotine, or I will walk you through a tapering process. I will share with you any kind of life hacks I've learned to help me with an anxiety attack, and I share all that stuff for free. These were when I went to a therapist, I learned all my life hacks that I did around anxiety, self-harm, panic attacks, not from a therapist, but because I needed to, because they all told me just try breathing exercises, and those didn't really work very well for me. And, the one thing I've found with a lot of people is you want stuff for free, and those aren't the people I want to help. People that
Yeah,
want shit for free, you want to get sober, you want to get clean because you're hoping that there's some magic pill out there you can take one of, and now all of a sudden you're magically sober. It's fucking work, and it's
yeah,
a grind, and it's not easy. And if you are invested somehow, guess what? Now that you're financially invested, you're probably going to focus on this a little bit more. It's
yeah,
amazing when we're an addict. It's a good deal, man. Dude, my dealer would get in a good 8 ball or a good thing of Coke or whatever, and I go get an 8 ball, and he'd cut me a break on it, be like 250. That's a good deal. $250, fucking an 8 ball or bullshit. But then somebody wants, 40, a psychiatrist or a psychologist appointment to go talk to him is $130, and that's a fucking ripoff.
exactly.
Wait,
Yeah.
wait a minute here. This doesn't make sense. Um, but it also prevents that ego, especially as addicts. We have to keep in mind. I mean, you know what it's like. You start doing this, and you're kind of doing it for yourself, and then all of a sudden you start realizing you're helping people, and this is kind of cool. Holy shit! The first person that you really kind of help, and they're thanking you. You feel good, and wow, it's kind of like AA and all this. You're sponsoring somebody, you're watching them grow, and you're helping a few more people, and you just feel really good, and you're investing all this energy and time into it, and more people are coming to you for help and more. And now all of a sudden it's you're letting me down because you weren't there when I needed you. Well, you know what? My family needed me. So I'm supposed
Yeah,
to put my family on hold for you. Wait a minute here. You know what I
exactly.
mean? And then
Exactly.
all of a sudden at a certain point, it can flip and become very, very toxic, or it's part of my healthy boundaries. And the people that pay me, yeah, if you want to talk to me, typically on a podcast, I charge $100 for a podcast. I've decided I haven't done podcasts in a while. I mean, I do my own. I was like, I saw your thing come across. I was like, yeah, sure, why not?
I appreciate it.
When it comes to, how I get paid, a lot of it's through brand deals or through companies I work with or rehabs I work with, and
Mhm.
how I provide for my family. And guess what that allows me to do? I can talk to people on a live stream for a couple hours a day and tell you how to get sober or remind you to go to a meeting or whatever it
Right.
might be.
Exactly. That's really cool, man. And for any of the haters out there, I just challenge you to just go back and listen to it with an open mind and think about it and think about your own life. Think about how you're making money in your life and what you're doing, and maybe cut some slack. Last thing I love to close with, and obviously you're an inspirational dude, but if anybody's out there struggling with, ADHD and maybe addiction or both or anything in life, what would you say to them if they were in front of you right now and they were just, you could tell they were on the fence. They were maybe about ready to make a terrible decision, or they were struggling so much and they just didn't know what to do. What would you say to them to give them hope, to help them to make that next step to change?
I guess the thing I would say to them to give them hope is, do you really want it? Or do you really want the change? Because I think that's the biggest thing that holds us back, is if we really want it or not. Ultimately, if you really want it and you want it bad enough, you're like, fuck, there's something not right. Now you're at least open minded to it. And that's where it goes into, who do you have that you can be honest with? And if you have nobody that you can be honest with, well, then get a doctor. Find a fucking stranger. If you want it bad enough, you will make it happen. If I got to a bad enough place, I couldn't get a hold of anybody, I'm gonna go find some motherfucking stranger out there at Albertsons or a grocery store or wherever, and be like, "Hey, I need help, dude. I'll talk to the cashier. Can you give me?" If you want it bad enough, you will make it happen. And so that's what you have to look at it as. We're so afraid of what people think and judgment and all that. And at the end of the day, I went from a life that I fucking hated to a life that I love every minute of it. I never thought it would be this way, but here it is. Now I get the ability to enjoy my life. It all became because I had the ability to look in the mirror and say, I have to change this.
I love that, man. And I'm proud of you and I'm glad you're here. And I'd like to think that your dad's proud of you too. You
Mhm,
know, I imagine he's up there looking down and just looking at Eric like, man, he's doing it. He's making money, he's helping people, and he's happy. Most of all, he's happy, you
mhm.
know. So thank you so much for being here, man. You're an inspiration. I want to pick your brain one of these days. Finally got you to text me, so now I got your number. So I'll
Exactly.
have to hit you up. Love to talk to you about some of the keynote stuff that you're doing. I think that's interesting and maybe an avenue that I want to try to go down at some point. So thank you so much, man, for being here. And with that being said, everybody else, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Share this out because somebody might need to hear this today. But love you guys. And really great to meet you, Eric. And you have a great rest of your day, buddy.
Back at you, man.
Yeah. Peace.
Later.